Great. Well, we continue Sports Month here at the Dublin Worthington Rotary Club, following up on last week's entertaining and informative presentation from Professor Wilson. We have tonight with us Dr. Chris Stankovich, otherwise known as the Sports Doc. Dr. Stankovich is a graduate of the Ohio State University, OH. He's also founder of Advanced Human Performance Systems, an athletic counseling and human performance enhancement center. Oh, thank you. Now I have a microphone. Thanks, Skip. Dr. Stankovich has co-written 5 books, including Positive Transitions for Student Athletes, The ParentsPlaybook, Mind of Steel, Optimal Balance for Life Success, and Sports Success 360 Degrees. And he has hundreds of articles published on topics related to sports psychology and athletic success. He's been featured for his work in USA Today, ESPN, the New York Post, Washington Post, Street and Smith Sports, Business Journal, San Francisco Chronicle, and ABC World News. Dr. Stankovich has been featured on the Ohio News Network, NBC4i Columbus, Columbus Parent Magazine, and is a featured columnist at a number of Ohio sports magazines. And in addition to his duties at his practice, Dr. Stankovich has taught undergraduate and graduate courses in psychology, education, and business at the Ohio State University, Wittenberg University, Capital University. Okay, he teaches a lot too. We're very pleased to have him here today to talk about sports psychology, and I am going through his essentials for parenting student athletes and coaching student athletes to try to prepare for the fall soccer season. I'm looking for some more tips. Dr. Stankovich.
Hi. Thanks for having me here today. I really appreciate it. I appreciate Brian finding me, and several months ago he invited me to be a part of this today, and I was excited to be here. So hopefully you've had a good summer. I'd like to just talk about a few things that I have on a handout. This will be kind of a loose presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at the end. In fact, I'm going to encourage you to have some questions. I love to talk about this stuff, but I'm not always sure what the audience is most interested in. But I'll tell you a little bit about my background, an introduction. When I was coming out of high school, going into college, I was like a lot of kids where I didn't really know what I wanted to do for a living. And in those days, back in the 80s, we didn't have psychology as a course in high school, so I really didn't know anything about the field. And I remember sitting in a class, a developmental psychology class, and just being blown away. It was so fascinating and interesting. And so I decided to major in psychology, and having always played sports, been involved in sports, been a fan of sports, I was thinking there has to be a way to kind of marry these fields together. And the field of sports psychology was really up and coming in the 80s and into the 90s. But what puzzled me was why there was so much focus on performance enhancement, and of course that's important. If you talk to any athlete or any coach, that's typically the first thing that they're interested in. But I felt like there were so many different ways that you could go. You could use sport as a vehicle for success in life. I thought it was a terrific medium to build confidence and self-esteem and resiliency and all these wonderful skills that oftentimes kids learn, and they tend to compartmentalize them and think that they're only good for sports. Or they falsely assume that other kids who are not involved in sports have also learned these same skills. So I kind of put that in the back of my mind, and as I went on and into graduate school at Ohio State, I had a terrific opportunity to work in the athletic department, to work with some of the greatest coaches, athletic directors, administrators, and of course student athletes. And I serendipitously fell upon a topic that has served as the crux of my work ever since, and that is back in the mid-90s, we started to discover so many student athletes at Ohio State, and this certainly is not an Ohio State issue. It was true of other colleges as well. I just happened to be at Ohio State. But we saw so many student athletes just kind of hanging around after their eligibility ended. And I want to be clear here, these were not the stereotypical dumb jocks or anything like that at all. In fact, many of these student athletes were quite high achieving, had done well academically, but ironically, and again, this is back in the 90s, think how much this has gotten worse, because they had played their entire life. Some of them had specialized. We certainly see a lot more sports specialization today than we did then. But some had specialized. And what was going on was at the end of their college careers, where only about 2% would go on to play professional sports. So I mean, think about that, a 98% attrition rate right there. many of them had no resumes, no volunteer experience, no internships. In the psychology world, we talk about their degree of career maturity, meaning how ready were they to go on to a realistic career path. And we found that very few of them were. And again, it wasn't so much their doing, but we compounded and created this as well. And we talk in psychology about a social identity, and that is how the world sees us. And for athletes, oftentimes because they wear the gear, the hats, the shirts, the coats, what we do a lot of times is we ask them, how'd you do in the game last night? How's your team doing? The secondary questions are, classes and family and things like that. So over time, we discovered that elite level athletes really create what we call an exclusive athletic identity, where they see themselves as an athlete, the world sees them as an athlete, and because there's so little time to get work experience, internships, volunteer, and things like that, they were coming out at 22, 23 years old with a resume that looked like this. And so we really, again, kind of fell into this. We created a course at Ohio State that was the first of its kind in the country called Positive Transitions for Student Athletes. It was designed to help these student athletes transition to whatever their field would be beyond sports. That class still goes on today. I get no royalties. It was the worst business deal I ever made in my life. But it did lead to the first book I wrote, Positive Transitions for Student Athletes. And, one of the things that we found most therapeutic and most helpful was helping these athletes identify athletic transferable skills. The things that they do each and every day as an athlete that employers find invaluable. You don't have to have a great resume if you can speak with confidence that you know how to multitask, you can communicate, you can resolve conflict, you know what it's like to be a team player. Who wouldn't want to hire that person? And so it was very empowering to learn that. And that really started the things that I do that work. And I found that if we are better equipped to understand the realities, in fact, I'll ask a quick question. I already gave you the number of the percentage of college student athletes that play at the pro level. Does anybody have a guess of the percentage of high school student athletes that will go on to play college sports? Now, this number will include walk-ons, partial scholarships, not just your full rides. Division III, no athletic scholarship. Anybody have a guess? 3? It's 5. It actually is. It's 5 to 7. 5 to 7% you'll see. So, even at that level, if you're not prepared, and I will tell you, it's unbelievable how that transition, that abrupt transition, has really distilled down to younger kids. I see kids in my practice every day. Maybe they're leaving sport because of an injury. Maybe it's deselection. They got cut and can't go on, or it's the end of their high school career. It's amazing how abrupt and how difficult that can be, even for young people. So it's not just pro athletes that you see in the news, but it really is everyday kids. And I think it's because of the reasons I talked about earlier. They specialize, they play year-round. This becomes who they are. Real quickly, one of the other things that we created back in the day was a thing called the Optimal Performance System in Sport. It was a multi-tiered model to working with student athletes. It included performance enhancement, of course. It also included life skills development, clinical issues that we see just with everyday people, and then a career module. And that we were very fortunate got talked about in USA Today and kind of put us on the map a little bit for the work we were doing almost 20 years ago. So that was exciting. You should have a sheet in front of you now that I'm going to kind of follow through with some of the things that I currently do, and I'll talk about some of the big issues that I find myself involved in today. Hopefully they'll be interesting to you. So currently I have a counseling practice. About half of my time I spend there. I work directly with athletes of all different ages and skill levels, from professional down to youth level. The issues range. Sometimes it is performance enhancement. Sometimes it's career retirement. It can be really just about anything that human beings experience. I also do consulting work and training, work with leagues and organizations and school districts, again, on a number of different topics. Leadership is a big area. I'll get to that in a few minutes. As Brian said, I do freelance writing and some media work. I currently write for the Ohio High School Athletic Association. They have a quarterly magazine. I'm very proud to be a part of that, and work with Dr. Dan Ross and his colleagues at that level to kind of talk about the issues that we're seeing on the front line. Also, the National Federation of High Schools has used me to write columns for them as well. I create products. I try to stay in front of the curve and think about things that could be of use. One of the things that I created a few years ago is called the Sport Performance Assessment. And I'll tell you a quick story about it. If you're a parent or a coach or you've been involved in sports, undoubtedly people have used the term mentally tough or mental toughness. And to me, it was always funny because what does that mean? If you're talking about mental toughness, for one athlete, it's a lack of confidence. For somebody else, it's a focus issue. For another athlete, it's anxiety. And for a fourth athlete, it might be a lack of resiliency. It doesn't bounce back quickly. So for years in my practice, I would work with athletes one-on-one to help them determine what really is lacking, what needs training. Because, with human performance, it's not a one-size-fits-all. And so I created a paper-pencil test to address that. Well, years later, when iPhones became popular and apps became popular, I worked with some designers and we created the world's first sports psychology mental toughness app called the Sport Performance Assessment. If you have a chance, it's on the website, and you can even look it up through the App Store for Apple. And it's been really exciting because it's a test that allows athletes to self-assess, see where their areas of strength and weakness are, but then also provides education so that right within that module, they can learn specific skills that help them improve in their areas of weakness. So it is a quite robust instrument. And then finally, I do college teaching, as Brian's talked about, so he's kind of listed some of that. But I want to move on to youth and interscholastic sports. There's a lot of issues today. In fact, the final book that Brian mentioned, Sports Success 360, and there's actually a website there, sportsuccess360.com, is an attempt to really help people involved in athletics, not just the athletes themselves, but coaches, administrators, even parents, understand what the issues are today, really cut to the chase, and then provide specific tips, learning tips, that you can use that will address the problem. So, for example, the first one, sports burnout. This is a really interesting time. More and more kids are getting burned out. It's not because we're purposely doing that. Some kids burn out because of the cumulative effect in sports. They've been playing since they were 4, 5, 6 years old. They're not going out on Saturday mornings and playing at an open sand lot, but they're 3 states away playing 14 games over 48 hours, and it's just a lot, And when you consider every survey that's ever been done, to my knowledge, when you look at the number one reason why kids play sports is to have fun. And, more and more kids get that fun part flushed out when it becomes more business-like. So we have the cumulative effect of sports burnout. We also have short-term burnout. Summer is a good time for that, where, kids will play, for example, baseball. Some of these travel leagues, 50, 60, 70 games in a very short period of time. So kids will sometimes get exhausted mentally from that. Some of the other issues, I'm trying to go quickly to get into some of these. Performance supplements and steroids, still a really big issue today. You'd be very surprised at how many young people kind of dabble in this as well. It's not just pro athletes. Pain pill addiction. We've got a major problem with prescription pain pill addiction. I'm working with a writer right now at USA Today that we should have a story coming out in the coming weeks about the efforts that we're doing here in Ohio to raise awareness. Certainly not unique to Ohio, but this is a very interesting area because unlike the typical recreation drug user, these individuals are student athletes who often get hooked because of the normal course of rehabilitation. So they have an injury, they go to their sports med physician. Depending on the severity of the injury, they may or may not be prescribed a pain pill. When they are prescribed, if we're not watching it closely, they can become addicted very, very quickly. These are opiate-based drugs. They're very addicting. And for a lot of these kids, when they can no longer get these drugs off the street, they will turn to heroin. It's widely available and cheaper. And, again, I've worked with kids at my office, and it brings a tear to your eye when you see that these are absolutely upstanding, intelligent, responsible kids who just got involved with something bigger than them. And so we're working at the state level. Ohio High School Athletic Association has been invested, the Attorney General, the Department of Health. I think what we're doing here is really fantastic. So hopefully we'll make great strides there. Some other things, coach training or lack thereof. Again, I think we lag behind there because so many schools and leagues are desperate for bodies. It can be a thankless job. There's not a lot of money at the youth level. There's no money, and there's certainly a lot of parental oversight and criticism, so it's tough to find good coaches. It's sometimes tough to find the time and money to provide training as well, but that's another issue. And then finally, again, there's so many things I could talk about, but for today, the leadership training. One of the things, a campaign, an educational curriculum that I've been working on for years now is called My Game, My Life, and it's a metaphor to help kids understand that what they're doing in sports can serve for success in life, and so that's another big area for me. Moving up the ladder, NCAA sports. I think you had a speaker here a week ago that talked about that. Unfortunately, I missed that. I'm sure it was terrific. There's a lot of things going on at that level as well. The question of institutions of higher learning is one that we talk about regularly now. This is a very different day and age. Most of your Division I football and basketball coaches make exponentially more money than even university presidents. I don't think you see that business model anywhere else but college athletics. It certainly creates a lot of opportunities. In fact, Bob Bowlesby, the Big 12 commissioner, just yesterday talked about cheating at the college sport level and how difficult it is to catch it. And then even when you do catch it, the consequences are really kind of light compared to the tens of millions of dollars that colleges and the NCAA make from our, what we call amateur sports today. So then that really leads to the second point, paying athletes in amateur sports. I think that we're seeing a lot of development there. About a week ago, there was a big article about the Big Five conferences. Maybe some of you saw that, where the Big Ten is one of the Big Five, where they're trying to condense the groups of people who make the decisions with the hopes that they might be able to create better stipends and pay athletes. Again, that's a whole big ball of wax there. I think in the coming years you're going to see more talk about. At the professional sports level, of course, sport retirement continues to be a big issue. I deal with athletes all the time that have difficulty there. There's been a greater emphasis on safety and concussions. I'm sure you've seen that in the news. I've been working with a couple groups, or talking to some groups now. I don't know what role I'll play, if any, but at least consulting with them now about different safety measures being taken with helmets to help alleviate some of the impact there, and with the hopes that concussions will be prevented or at least minimized. Social media exposure at the pro sports level. Inevitably, almost every day there's some athlete who uses Twitter or another form of social media to put their foot in their mouth, so that can cause a lot of problems there. And then just this week, a really big issue that's going on. In fact, I listened to it on the way up. ESPN's talking about it all morning. The Michael Sam situation, gay athletes in sports, that's a big issue. Some of you probably saw Tony Dungy's comments yesterday, and so there's, again, this is a kind of a watershed moment where we just saw in the NBA a year ago with Jason Collins, and now you're seeing potentially the first gay NFL player, Michael Sam. It's again a very different time today, a more accepting and tolerant time, so that's a good thing. And then finally, some of the products that I thought might be of interest to you today that I can talk briefly about, and if you have some questions, I'll be happy to answer those. My most recent DVD is called Own the Game. I do not have a copy of it here today, but it was designed to help athletes of all different ages, skill levels, sports, learn some of the skills that actually improve mental toughness. And I know this is kind of a nebulous term, but like I said earlier, when we break it down, we want to help athletes understand that this is a skill set similar to lifting properly in a gym or the technique that you use in your sport. You can learn to improve your focus. There's nothing fuzzy about that. It's not hocus pocus or anything like that. And the training is certainly not designed for losers or athletes who have psychopathologic problems. It is a skill set. So teaching them how to use skills like imagery and positive self-talk and cue words, even goal setting. There's an entire science behind goal setting. It's not just, write something on a piece of paper and stick it on a wall, but there's a science behind that. And the good news is there's a lot of evidence, and growing evidence, that athletes who use this type of training do, in fact, improve their mental toughness, and there is really positive correlations to on-field performance. Sports Success 360, I do have a copy of, a little book that I wrote a couple years ago that really outlines all the big contemporary issues today. Many of them I've already talked about. SportsSuccess360.com. I'd encourage you to visit that at your convenience. It's an online module that's designed to help at a system level. I've got different districts around that engage in it. They're licensed to it. It's a system that's 24/7. You can go on, you can learn about any of the issues that you're interested in. You can get advice and feedback to help you address those issues. I've talked about My Game, My Life. It's a curriculum. One of the items that I brought here today is a sports journal. This is an example of one of the things that I use with athletes. Journaling and keeping track of some of the things that help you play well, or some of the things that are kind of clogging up things that prohibit you from play well. A lot of times we forget that, and our memories aren't as good as we like to think. So years ago I started encouraging athletes to journal, It was a tough sell, especially for guys who thought, I'm not going to be a girl who keeps a diary. So what I did instead was I created a template that actually prompts them to answer questions every day. And it's a lot easier because they look at it as a homework assignment. And I've had a lot more success that way as a result. And it was always the guys. The women had no problem with it. And then my most recent ebook was out about a year ago. You can find this on Apple. It's The Athlete's Guide to Mental Toughness. Again, it's an interactive book that's got videos and different things, trying to kind of keep up with the times and provide information in a variety of different ways. And I think Brian mentioned the toolkits there as well on the website. I would encourage you, if you have time, go to the website. There's a lot of products. There's a lot of free information. If you have Twitter, my handle is at the top. It's at Dr. Stankovich. Basically, everything I do, any article or anything that I come upon that I think is interesting, I try to put up there. I encourage you to follow me there if you are interested. So, I don't know how I'm doing on time.
Question?
Yes.
Question?
Yeah.
So, from last week's talk and what you said today, a lot of the problems that I see as both a parent of an athlete and a youth recreational coach seems really cultural in nature to me. That the parents who show up, and even to some extent the athletes, but mostly the parents, show up expecting this to be a battle that their kids need to win. Is that a cultural phenomenon that will ever dissipate, or am I stuck with that? Yeah.
Great question. I think it's inevitable to get everybody on board. I mean, certainly there are some parents that have their own agendas. Some coaches will never measure up. Some parents have unfinished business. Maybe they didn't finish their career quite the way they'd like. So I don't know that we're going to get everybody, but I'm a big believer in training, and I'm really a big believer that you can maximize training and you can do a nice job. Rich Stiles, a friend of mine for many years now, we were just talking about this. A lot of people talk the talk, but to actually walk the walk, to find good training, to invest in good training. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I truly believe in that. I know I'm biased, but, for example, just making parents aware of the realities. No matter how many camps, clinics, and programs you put your kid in, 5% go on. Maybe you boost your chances a little bit, but the reality is it's a long shot. I remember speaking at a college conference almost 20 years ago now, and somebody in the crowd said, if you look at the statistics, your kid has a better chance at being a brain surgeon or a rocket scientist than he does a pro athlete. Something to think about. So I believe in training. I think there's a lot of good that can be done in the leagues and schools that do it. I think there's a benefit to that. Yes?
What do you do about training or helping these young athletes learn about living in the public eye?
That's another really great question. And when I do the leadership training, for example, next week will be, it's either the 6th or 7th year in a row, Upper Arlington schools, we've had this leadership program that I'm very proud of, and I think that we talk about these kinds of things. What we do is we take the student athletes who have been elected captains for the upcoming season. So we'll get the fall sport athletes next week, and we talk about what it means to be a role model and a leader, because we ascribe that status to them. We assume that our student athletes are leaders. But a big part of the conversation anymore is helping them become aware that they're really on 24/7 now. And we're all with our camera phones, and, we like the juicy news. And, if you see a kid with a Letterman's coat on doing something that maybe he or she shouldn't be doing, who's to say someone else doesn't take that picture and upload that? In fact, I remind kids just being at a party with the red plastic cup in your hand, even if it's water in there, you're probably going to get whacked for that. So I think it's a big thing, and we as adults don't always do the best job being aware that their eyes on us all the time. Of course, kids, I think, struggle with that even more. So I think just, again, raising awareness is what we try to do.
They turn the same cupcakes to their neighbors.
See.
LeBron, he sent cupcakes to all of his neighbors.
Oh, he did?
Just
I didn't hear that.
An apology for all the uproar. That's a very smart move on his part. But I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
What's your comment or thought from your field of study and expertise about what's going to happen to the psyche of football players in California, given the news yesterday that they're changing the tackling rules?
You know, I don't know enough about that to comment. In fact, can you expand on that a little bit? I saw a headline, but I didn't have a chance to read about it yet.
Yeah, according to Fox News.
Yeah.
As I understand it, it's going to be a lot more record keeping because an athlete, youth, I mean, we're talking about the young athletes, can only be in the game so many minutes and exposed to being tackled, number one. And there are rules about how you can tackle now that are much different. So it isn't a brawl anymore. And I suppose everybody will get a trophy.
Well, another great question.
Anyway, but I also was interested to learn that Texas has what's considered to be a tougher tackling regulation, I guess you'd call it, and I don't know what it is. But,
Great question. You know, I've actually written about this, not from the perspective of what they're doing in California, but I look at it as a balancing act on a fulcrum. On the one side, why do we watch sports? It's the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat. It's you remember the wide world of sports, the skier going over? Okay, the folks old enough to know that. So you have to have the fun and excitement there. But then on the other side, you certainly want to offer the most safe game. You don't want to have another generation in the future like the former NFL guys that have sued for the concussions and the pain pills and things like that. So it's how do you balance that? And those are some of the best conversations I've had with Dr. Ross and OHSAA here in Ohio is, how do we best protect kids, but at the same time allow it to be a fun product? And I think that changes with the times. Like 5 years ago, we weren't talking about concussions nearly like we are today. And now you could even argue we've gone almost too far. Some of the ideas out there, maybe this is one of them, of, adjusting the physicality to a point where it's not the game that people have come to love. So those are my quick thoughts on that.
Leave it to California.
Well, don't they want to break into 6 states? I just read that last week. Yes.
I have a question on this. When you talk about mental toughness, what's the distance between mental toughness versus I'm an athlete and I can do anything I want?
Well, that mindset probably is a good one on the field. I can do anything I want. I think it sometimes gets them in trouble off the field. Some of the athletes who have sought or needed counseling more than anyone are the last ones to seek it because of that machismo. It pays great dividends to be the first to practice and the last to leave. Unfortunately, that isn't always the best way to go in life when you need help. But to me, mental toughness, again, it's an area that can be improved upon. I don't believe it's something people are born with. Most of the athletes I work with have not a clue about focus, for example. How to minimize the irrelevant factors and focus on the things they control, not the things they don't control. It's baseball season. I had a minor league guy at the office yesterday. We were talking about, he gets caught up on who's watching him. What the big league team is doing to see if he can improve. Irrelevant. It has nothing to do with his plate appearances. But when you start to think like that, you widen your focus, and you're not nearly as precise. You can widen your focus if you're a star athlete at 12. When you're the biggest kid out there, they generally are pretty good, even if they're not mentally tough. But when you go up the ladder, I think the difference for most is really here, how quickly they bounce back. You take a sport like golf, as Rich will tell you, or baseball, where the measurement is always there, and every day you see every statistic, and it eats these guys up. How do you develop a resiliency where you don't focus on that? And so, those are some of the things that I talk about. Yes.
Just ask you one
Sure.
thing. A lot of people in here maybe played sports or something. It's just changed incredibly over the last 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
You got to almost pick a sport very early, very young, dedicated to you. I think soccer is the biggest offender, but they want you almost 12 months a year. The parents want to win. The high school, if you're not doing the travel sports, you're not going to probably be involved in high school. Football would probably like you to do spring football now. I just say, what is the future? Where are we heading? Because it used to be fun. You would play basketball, then you move right into baseball. And a lot of that fun is not there because all the pressure. The year-round, the burden.
Yeah, and you're right again. There's a sister sport at the community level for every sport you see except for football, and I'm sure that will eventually change. There are kids today, not a lot, but there are certainly kids out there that select playing for a club or a travel league over their own home school. You know, we've seen that happen. I've seen a spike in the last couple years in the number of families who are, in fact, I did a segment for NBC that's going to come up in August on whether or not to hold their child back, not because of academic reasons, but exclusively for athletic development. And it surprises me because there was always a stigma with that when we were kids, right? You didn't want to be the kid that got held back, and I mean no disrespect to that, but you know, there was a stigma. And now I've seen more families not really care about that. It's like, you know, if I can get this kid bigger, stronger, more mature, I got a better chance. And fortunately, I've had enough of these stories now where I don't have that look on my face of just, you know, I can't believe we're having this conversation. I've become desensitized to it. But yeah, I mean,
It's a trend to me.
It's
where we're going to be in 30 years.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Last
Yep.
question.
Yep.
Go ahead.
To comment on that,
Yeah.
I think it's a generational thing. I mean, I think about myself as, you know, part of a generation that grew up with exactly what you're talking about. And if and when my generation has kids swinging back and saying, we went through this, it's not what we think is the right thing, I think you should play through sports instead of be a year-round soccer player. Is that kind of where the only way it's going to...
I personally hope so. I like the sports sampling model myself. I think you run a much less risk of burnout for sure. I think it's fun. You work different parts of your body. I mean, for me personally, what I would love to see, and this is where you get to a point in your life where you start to feel old because you tell the kids younger than you that this used to happen when you were a kid. But, you know, I don't know about you guys, but, you know, you drive around anymore and you see a lot of empty fields, you know, and I do remember as a kid, especially in the summer, every day. I mean, we had our bats and gloves and, you know, we're out on the diamond, pickup games and wiffle ball and, you know, just anything you can do to play. That has certainly been substituted today by a lot of organized sports. And there are probably other factors there as well. I mean, every young kid I see at the office does video games, and they do it at a really high level. They play a lot. I mean, so it's not just organized sports, but I would love to see it swing back a little bit more to some normalcy, but that remains to be seen. I mean, I think there's still a lot of adults who think that more is better and kind of overlook some of these other things that can impede that progress. Thank you. Sure. Yeah. Yep. Out of your way.
Okay, one last thing, Doctor, is that as a token of our appreciation, we will be donating a book in your name to one of the schools in which we tutor.
All right.
So we
Very good.
appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank
And I've
you.
got some things I'll